Hello, everyone. So good to be with you. And yeah, so slight change in the planning, but I think it would be too long to do the whole thing in one stretch. I think it will work better this way. So today I will finish part 3, which was focused on being and wujud and understanding God as being. Then I will just give a highlight of some of the key things that will come up in part 4, which is a lot more to do with experience and the practical dimension of internalizing what we have learned and making it real, a lived experience, not just an idea. And so I'll give just a highlight of some of that today, and then we will, inshallah, regroup early next year and go into much more detail. Okay, so with that, just a recap of last session, we began to go into more detail into the understanding of wujud and understanding God, different levels of being, maratib al-wujud. And we spoke about 2 main levels to understand, al-ahadiyya and wahidiyya. And then we discussed the issue of understanding God's attributes. We did that through looking at the first khutbah of Imam Ali in Nahj al-Balagha, where he goes through a series of explanations about Tawheed and understanding God and understanding how to understand his attributes, his sifat, and the things to avoid in terms of misunderstanding. And inshallah, you saw how it links and corresponds to what we've been discussing in the last few sessions, the importance of understanding God as being unlimited, no limits to his being, and that essentially, the level of ahadiyya is one where we see pure infinite being without any conditions, right? Without any type of limits or conditions. We call that wujud bishart la, bishart la meaning no conditions, right? So the condition of no conditions. And there, at the level of ahadiyya, there is no multiplicity at all. There is no kathra. There is no differentiating between one reality and another, one concept and another. It's a pure oneness, infiniteness. So that was ahadiyya. That's the highest level that we covered so far. Now, today we're going to go even deeper, but that's what we covered so far. Then after ahadiyya, there's a manifestation process that happens of zuhur, in which we start to see differentiation of different attributes of being. It's still talking about being. We're not changing it into something else. No, it is being itself, but now differentiated and manifesting in different ways, different aspects. That's what the attributes are. They're different aspects, different ways in which pure being can manifest. So knowledge, power, compassion, all of these things are ways in which, if you have pure being, you can manifest them in different ways. That's what we're talking about, and that's called wujud bishart shay. You are conditioning it. You're saying, I'm referring to a specific aspect, which is knowledge, or another aspect, which is power. These are not the same thing as a concept. There is differentiation. But with an understanding that at the level of ahadiyya, they effectively think of it as them merging together. It is one reality, but it can manifest in more than one way. They are not parts. They are not parts. They are not additional to the essence. They are identical to the essence, but they just are different manifestations. Okay, so that's how we avoid true multiplicity. There's no true real multiplicity. There's only the appearance of multiplicity, only manifestation. Okay, so these are some of the concepts we covered last time. Now, what I'm going to do here today is to take this to another level. I just want to give you a sense that in this school of Irfan is amazing depth of understanding and insight that has been developed to, again, refine the understanding more and more. And you'll get a sense of it. It's a little more difficult to understand. So don't worry if it's not making sense the first time. It takes a long time to really absorb these things. It takes a lot of study, but hopefully you'll get an idea of it. So let me share some slides. And we'll start. So this is what we looked at last week. And what we covered was these two levels, right? Al-ahadiyya and wahidiyya. And as I said, you can think of ahadiyya, wahidiyya, this level where we have started to see some differentiation and some multiplicity appearing, as being merged up into ahadiyya. So it starts at ahadiyya and then it differentiates and manifests in differentiated form in wahidiyya, where all these attributes manifest. So now the next version, this is the simplified version. Okay, now, and this is totally consistent with everything that we've discussed so far, but now I'm going to go a deeper, more detailed version. And the detailed version, I'll still display the same two, ahadiyya and wahidiyya, okay? But now, actually, we're going to introduce another level, which is higher than even these two, okay? So even ahadiyya is not actually the ultimate level in thinking about the levels of God's being. Okay, the highest level is called the dhat. Okay, the essence itself. Okay, so you can think of ahadiyya and wahidiyya as a kind of oneness. Okay, in English we translate it as non-duality or unicity, and then unity. Okay, a unity is a unity of multiple things, but unicity or non-duality doesn't have any of that. It's just infinite. But above that, we have the dhat. And now we'll go through what's the difference between these. Okay, so the idea is this. We've said that ultimately what we know, what God himself tells us, is that his essence is totally unknowable and unlike anything else, right? Laysa kamithlihi shay, at all, right? Altogether. Now, we've talked about, a lack of limits as being kind of, this idea of being at the highest level we can imagine, right? No limits, infinite. But what has been understood by these guys is that there is a higher level even than that, which is a level where you have pure infinite being without any conditioning at all. Okay. And what it's distinguishing is that when I say, oh, there is no limits, well, that's a limit. In a way, in a subtle way, when you say that he can only be unlimited, and not even manifest in multiple with limits, you are conditioning him. You're conditioning him by saying that he cannot be conditioned. Right? Conditioning of having no limits. It's a type of conditioning. And so if we want to conceive and understand God at the highest level, where he's totally unconditioned, totally free, then there's a higher level. And here, this level is one where there's no conditioning at all, not by being unlimited or by being limited. You see, there's a total freedom or ability to be unlimited or limited. That's even higher than the level of being unlimited. You see, it's the ability to be both or neither in a way that we just cannot understand. Okay, so it's totally unknowable, but it's a level where there is absolute unconditioning. Okay, that's what you see here. So let me put up the other descriptions. And what you'll see is that before, when we talked about ahadiyya, okay, we talked about wujud bishart la, right? Wujud bishart la. So wujud conditioned by being unconditioned, unlimited, right? That's what I said. Bishart, yeah, but the condition of la, no limits, no conditioning, right? So that was ahadiyya. But now, instead of wujud bishart la, we go to a higher level. When we talk about the Dhat Allah, we say it is wujud la bishart. Okay, slightly different. Wujud la bishart. Okay, la bishart means no conditions. Okay, so it's not the condition of no limits. No, it is the lack of any conditions, even the condition of being unlimited. So it's beautifully summarized in Arabic in this phrase. غير مقيد بالإطلاق أو التقييد. Okay, not limited by being infinite or limited. Okay, it's a little bit complicated to understand, but the idea is this: he can be unlimited or he can be limited. He has the ability to do either or be neither. It's absolutely unconditioned. So compared to that, ahadiyya is relative unconditioned. Okay, so there's an unconditioning, meaning that there are no limits, right? In ahadiyya, there are no limits, right? It is infinite being. Okay, so there's no, it's unconditioned because there are no limits, but it's a relative unconditioning. Okay, relative unconditioning, because there is a like a faint, like a weak conditioning even there, right? Because we are forcing it to be unlimited in a way, so to speak. It's like it's forced to be unlimited. So it's still a kind of conditioning. And so this is called relative unconditioning. Whereas with the Dhat, we're talking about absolute unconditioning, not conditioned by being infinite or by being limited, finite. Okay, so on this diagram, you see a slight difference. which is that we have the wahidiyya, where you have multiplicity, right? Think of each of these is one of God's attributes, right? So you can say Al-Alim, Al-Qadir, Al-Hayy, Al-Rahim, Al-Razzaq. All of these would be all of the different attributes of being, right? That's wahidiyya. Compared to that, ahadiyya is a oneness, right? There's no differentiation in it, okay? But that's now no longer the ultimate. The ultimate, the center of this diagram, just to kind of help us to understand, is the dot, which is even the higher level than, even an even higher level than ahadiyya. That is the ultimate unknowable essence. Okay, wujud la bishart. Now there's no condition. So if you notice last time, the way I was talking about it, it sounded like ahadiyya was like that. Yeah, that it's the ultimate level, it's infinite. But here you see a more subtle insight that even being infinite and only being able to be infinite is a kind of limitation. And so we conceive of a level even higher where you can have unlimited or limited, and the ability to be both or neither of those. That's the level of dhat. Okay, so that's a little bit more detail and gives you an idea of just how subtle and how deep this understanding of it. I call it the science of Tawheed. It's the science of Tawheed. Just if you go into any field like physics or chemistry or something, you'll get into incredible levels of detail and fine understanding, very subtle concepts. It's a science, of course, right? Well, here you're getting a taste of the science of Tawheed, of understanding being and wujud itself. And so hopefully it inspires you to look more into this and learn more, because it's, for me, truly beautiful. And an amazing thing about it is that it's also very universal. I mean, we talk about it as Allah, Sifat Allah, right? All of these different attributes, and we talk about the name Al-Ahad, that's where Ahadiyya comes from, and so on. But actually, I can speak to anybody on this planet about this in very universal terms. I can talk to people from other religions about this in this way, in a very universal way, and even to atheists. You can just talk about being and then different levels of being, whether it's conditioned, relatively unconditioned, absolutely unconditioned. I don't even need to use the word God. I can just talk about it as wujud, as being. And that becomes a universal conversation. So it's beautifully deep and universal as well. Okay, so with that, what I'll do now is build on this, okay? This is looking at, understanding maratib al-wujud as so far with regards to God himself. Now what we'll do is show how this process now flows into creation of the world, creation of you and me, okay, and everything else that is in creation. How does that happen? How does that process unfold? Okay, now it's going to follow this framework. We're going to start with that, and then ahadiyya, and then we go to wahidiyya, and then we'll flow from there. Okay, so I'll have another diagram to show you, but that's, it's not going to be completely different. It's going to build on what we've covered so far. Okay, so let's move to that whole thing here. So we have another diagram here. Don't worry, we'll walk through it step by step. But essentially, this is the process of manifestation of being. Okay, the process of vuhur. Okay, vuhur al-haq. And so we go from pure existence, pure, absolutely unconditioned being, right? That's a dot, that's where we started. And then successively, we will show how that now manifests in different ways, all the way through to manifesting in the forms of the empirical world. Empirical world means the world that we see around us, and the things that we see around us. Okay, it's all guided by this hadith Qudsi, very well known, which says, "Kuntu kanzan makhfiya, فأحببت أن أعرف فخلقت الخلق لكي أعرف." Okay, لكي أعرف. And so he's saying here, I was a hidden treasure, and I loved to be known, and therefore I created everything in order to be known. That's what manifestation is for. You manifest, in order to be known. If you don't manifest the different aspects of you, others will not know what you are. If you don't speak, or if you don't act, people will not know your attributes of, for example, your knowledge or your power or your compassion. These would remain hidden, right? Even for you as a human being, it would be that way. They would remain hidden. And so he's saying that that itself is like a hidden treasure with these beautiful attributes of being. And there's a natural process of wanting to manifest that and thereby become known. And this reminds me of a beautiful hadith from Imam Hussein, where he says, إن الله تعالى لم يخلق الخلق إلا ليعرفوه فإذا عرفوه عبدوه وإذا عبدوه استغنوا بعبادته عن عبادة ما سواه. Okay, so he says that God didn't create us or everything other than to be known. And once he is known, the natural thing that happens, I'm just using my words here, is that, I'm paraphrasing his words, is that once you know him, then there's a natural devotion that will arise from that. And that will be manifested in us by these acts of worship that we do out of devotion to God. And that devotion then leads us to become free of becoming devoted or worshiping anything else. So it starts with that ma'rifah. ليعرفوه فإذا عرفوه عبدوه وإذا عبدوه استغنوا بعبادته عن عبادة ما سواه. No worship of any other thing will happen. But it all starts with this ma'rifah, and it builds on this hadith. Okay, so with that said, let me now show how this process happens. So we start with existence itself, right? ذات الوجود, the existence itself, pure being, absolute being. That's a dot, okay? Absolutely unconditioned and unknowable. If it did not manifest, nothing else would know it. It would only know itself. Then we go through successive manifestations, okay? And maybe I'll use this pen function here today just to try and make it easier to follow on this diagram. Hopefully you can see what I'm pointing to. So we're starting in the center here with existence itself. This is a dot, okay? Then what happens is the first manifestation that arises is a pure oneness, an infiniteness, okay? If we want to sort of visualize it in a way, think of it as when we have a dot, the existence itself, it's like a blank sheet of paper. There's nothing to see, nothing to differentiate. So that's where we start. and then one dot appears, just a point, okay? And that is ahadiyya, okay? It's a pure oneness. There's no multiplicity in it. There's no differentiation in it. It's one. And so that's what ahadiyya is. Then that one expands into that circle that we showed, where now we start to have the level of wahidiyya, where after ahadiyya, we go to wahidiyya. Here is where we start to manifest all of these different attributes of God, sifat, right? So all of these different attributes like knowledge, power, grace, sustenance giving, compassion, all of these different attributes of God start to appear. And now we started to see some multiplicity, right? This is the first level at which we start to see some kathra, some multiplicity starts to arise. Okay, now here they have some detail. If you notice on this diagram, I don't know if it's very clear, this is a dotted line. This level of wahidiyya has two kind of sides to it, okay? Within wahidiyya, it has an inner aspect and an outer aspect. In wahidiyya itself, in wahidiyya itself, there is an inner aspect and an outer aspect. The sifat, the attributes that we've been speaking about, that's the inner aspect. That's why if you notice in the circle with the dotted lines, the names and attributes are on the inner part of the circle, right? And then you have an outer part. And that outer part is what is called the eternal archetypes. Okay, in Arabic they are called al-a'yan al-thabita. Okay, I'll explain what these are. I have a spelling mistake here, sorry about that. Just should read eternal archetypes. Okay, both of these, okay, eternal archetype and the names and attributes are within this level of wahidiyya. Okay, you see here how wahidiyya covers both aspects. It has an inner aspect and it has an outer aspect, all still within wahidiyya. Okay, now what happens here? What's going on? So what happens here, maybe I'll stop sharing for a second. What happens is this. This is the way I want you to start to understand it. We started from that oneness of ahadiyya. Okay, so this is just being, infinite being. Now that infinite being starts to manifest in different ways, which we call the attributes. Okay, sifat Allah. These are all different ways that being can show itself, can manifest itself. Okay, ظهور الصفات. Okay, الظهور بالصفة. Okay, so you get ilm and qudra and rahma, right? Knowledge, power, compassion. These are all different ways that being can manifest. Now, what can happen then is that you can get kind of a mixing of these attributes together to form entities, okay, concepts, things that can exist as a manifestation of one attribute or a combination of attributes. Okay, so I'll give you an example. If we take the attribute rahma, right, compassion or mercy in English, right, rahma. So rahma is one way that being can be manifested, right? Now, one of the things in the world that we see that is considered or understood to be an entity that is a manifestation of rahmah, of the mercy, is water, al-ma. Okay, water is a manifestation of mercy. Okay, for obvious reasons, right? The role that water plays in keeping life going, it is a kind of mercy. Okay, it's a way of that mercy can be manifested. It is rahmah. It is rahmah manifested in a physical form. Okay, that's water. But if you combined, for example, rahmah with qahariya, okay, al-qahar. So you take al-Rahman and you take al-qahar, and you mix these two together, you would get something like a hurricane. You see, you get a hurricane. You get the same water, but it's coming with qahariya, which means overwhelming power, right? It's a dominating power, and so rahma and qudra together and qahariya together can mix to create a new entity, which is the concept of hurricane, for example, right? And so in this way, you can get an infinite combination of different attributes mixing together to form the infinite range of concepts of things that could be created. They haven't been created yet. Okay? They are now just concepts in God's knowledge being differentiated from each other. So at the higher levels of Dhat and Ahadiyya, they are all kind of there, but they're in a kind of merged form. Here they are just differentiating and manifesting as individual concepts. Okay, so when we say eternal archetypes, or in Arabic we call them al-a'yan al-thabita, these are basically concepts. Okay, they are concepts. To use terminology from what we spoke about in earlier sessions, they are the mahiyat, right? The mahiyya of everything is what makes that thing what it is, right? The definition of that thing, the limits, the boundaries, the set of limits that define what that concept is, that mahiyya, right? So that's what the eternal archetypes are. They are the mahiyat, okay? And so at this point, what's happened is that being has manifested in a set of attributes. And then the next level is that the attributes themselves start forming relationships with each other and manifesting at another level, where you've got an infinite number of individual entities that can exist. They don't exist yet, but they can exist. They exist as potential beings, as the contents of the knowledge of God. Okay, that's the way to try to understand what I'll be showing on this diagram here, right? And that's why all of this is happening at the level of wahidiyya. Okay, and so these are two aspects of the wahidiyya. You start with the names and the attributes, okay, the sifat wal asma. They then start forming relationships with each other, and that leads to these eternal archetypes, all of these concepts that can exist. Okay, and then finally, the final step of the actual process of manifestation, this dhuhur that happens, is that he gives existence or manifests the concept in the actual physical world that we see. Okay, so that's this last step, creation of the world itself, the empirical things, right? The actual physical and even the spiritual entities, right? The beings, the things that we see around us, including ourselves, are manifestations of those eternal archetypes, right? So each time we're advancing the process of manifestation, and we start from simple to more complex, and the complexity arises from this kind of combinations, these self relationships that can form between different aspects of being. Okay, and then finally, once these concepts have been differentiated, then he brings them into being in the sense that they now start to manifest what they are. Okay, so then they are no longer just concepts. They actually have being, and they can have the effects of being. So let's take another example. Let's say I don't think this is right per se, but I think we can use it as an example. Let's say Al-Qadir, right, the all-powerful, is manifested in the form of fire. Okay, fire is a manifestation of power, for example. Okay, of a particular type of power. So that would be this level of Wahidiyya, where the attribute starts and then manifests as the concept of fire. Okay, so at this point, we are at the A'yan al-Thabita, and we have the concept of fire. And then the final step that I'm talking about as the empirical things, the creation of the empirical world, is taking the concept of fire and turning it into actual fire, right? Fire has effects, it burns. The concept of fire doesn't have those effects, right? The concept of fire, the idea of fire doesn't burn. When you think about it, it doesn't burn you. It's real fire that burns. And that is where the being has given effect to it. Okay, you see the athar al-wujud, right? The athar, the effects of the entities are manifested. That's the final step, which is this empirical world, empirical things. That's the last step in this process. Okay, so I know it's a bit complicated, but I'm just showing you some of the detail of how we understand going from, remember we started with wajib al-wujud, right? This necessary being. And that was this idea that a being whose essence is being, is existence itself, right? Well, but guess what? That's exactly what we started with here. Existence itself. And then we go through a series of manifestations, which is what we said is this viewpoint understands the process of creation, understands what we are and everything that the world is a manifestation of that pure being. And now we've just gone through a step-by-step process. You don't just go from wajib al-wujud and then suddenly we have everything in this world. You need to show how that happens step by step. How does all this multiplicity arise from something that is totally simple, basit? And so hopefully you get this idea of how this progressively moves from pure oneness through to starting to see no limits, and then various forms of limits together. All right, with that, I'll move on now to talk about where we fit into this picture. Human beings, where do we fit in this picture? So this is hopefully interesting and also inspiring, because the human being has a very unique role in this entire structure. And so it should inspire us all to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. So what is the role of the human being? In Irfan, in the school of Irfan, we have this technical concept of al-insan al-kamil, the perfect human, the perfect man, or the perfect human being. Okay. And where that concept fits is that what we said was everything in this world is a manifestation of one of the attributes of God or a combination of some of those attributes, right? That's what I was saying. You know, they mix together and they in different proportions and different combinations, and that's what you end up with of all the different things that you see in the world. So what about us? What do we represent? Well, the name Allah in Irfan represents a dot, the essence itself. Okay, and so it represents all of the attributes, all of the sifat are contained in the name Allah. Allah is basically a master name under which all the other names exist. Okay, it represents all of Wahidiyya, or you can say it even represents the Dhat itself. But let's focus on Wahidiyya. It represents all of Wahidiyya. It's called Al-Ism Al-Jami', the combining name, the totality name. Okay, because it contains all of the attributes. Okay, that's what Allah means. That's what it represents. That's how it fits in this structure of the names. Okay. And the amazing thing is that Al-Insan Al-Kamil, perfect human being, is a manifestation of Allah. That's what a human being represents. He manifests all of the attributes. And that's why he has the position that he has. That's why he's Khalifatullah, or has the ability to be the real Khalifa, because he can represent Allah because he manifests all of the attributes. Not just one or two of them, not a combination of some of them. No, all of the attributes are contained in Insan al-Kamil, okay? The perfect human being. Because you're able to reflect and manifest all of those beautiful attributes, all of those names. This is one of the meanings of the verse in the Quran where it says, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. He taught Adam all the names. It's interpreted as he represents and has the ability to reflect all of those names. You can know God in all of those names. What's interesting is we take it for granted. We totally, take it for granted. We understand what qudra is, power, what knowledge is, ilm, what hayat is, life, what rahma is, mercy. These are easy concepts for us to understand. But what in this structure, what it says is that other beings don't have the ability to know God in all of those different attributes. So even the angels, the malaika, they actually only know God through one name. So you will have one of those angels, for example, he will only know that God is Al-Qadir. He is all-powerful. That's all he knows. And so when he worships God, he worships that attribute because that's what he's created under. He's a child of a manifestation of Al-Qadir only. That's what the Malaika are like. That's what the angels are like. They only know one aspect of God, one attribute of God. Whereas we automatically have the ability to know all of these different names and attributes and to be able to contemplate them, to understand them, to appreciate them. That's because we've been created as a manifestation of the name Allah, which is al-ism al-jama' that combines all the names together. You see? So that's why the human being has such an important position in this entire structure. And if we drill into it even more and think of it kind of, kind of scientifically, or using, both the Quran language and some, modern way of thinking of things, it's consciousness. It's human consciousness that makes us unique among all creatures. Okay, that consciousness, which I personally interpret to be ruh, is what allows us to be the perfect mirror for the divine. Okay, because we have that ability to be self-aware. Okay, and that's all of part 4 that we're going to talk about, is all about this, about our ability to be aware and to be self-aware. These two things are what makes the human being unique and what makes him able to be a reflection of God, who, if you remember, we defined as infinite, self-aware being. You see, infinite, self-aware being. And so if we are to be a perfect reflection of that, then it is that self-awareness in us that is what makes us unique. Okay, and this verse, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, breathed into him from my spirit, is a direct reference to this, that we share this divine attribute, have the ability to reflect it. Okay, so that's where human beings fit in all of this. So it's part of that manifestation process, but there is one being, one type of being that represents all of those names. So all of those names together, mixed together, they form the eternal archetype of human being, concept of human being. And then that archetype is brought into being and now is able to manifest all of those names in a single being. You see, all of the attributes are being manifested. Different attributes in different beings, different combinations, all together, they're all there. But there's no single being that reflects all of them together in a single being. That's only the human being. It's beautiful and inspiring. That's what we are. Okay, now that's a perfect human being. So we have a lot of work to do to truly reflect all of that and, remove all of the obstacles to all of that beauty being reflected. But that's what we are capable of. That's the potential that lies within us. All right, so that is the end of part 3 of the course. And so what I'll do now is just briefly talk about what type of things we go into when we talk about part 4, where we come to know God through our own experience, through this consciousness that we have, right? So we started with knowledge from the external world, the world of science. We did that through both physics and biology. Then we came to the world of the mind, and that's where we developed these concepts and understood wajib al-wujud and how wujud itself manifests, all of that. And we've now developed an entire system, a way of understanding everything in existence, all through just the concept of existence and its manifestations. It's actually beautifully simple. It's just wujud and madahir al-wujud. It's just being and the manifestations of being. That's it. There's nothing else. Everything else is contained in that. Now, that's a beautiful idea, beautiful concept. But if it just remains an idea, it will not change us. It will not transform us. We will not live it. We will not manifest it in our own lives, in the way that we live. And that's why part 4 goes into how to make this a lived reality. That is how you actually see and experience the world. Okay. So let's go through a few things on this. As I said, I'm going to just keep this high level because each of these, we've had, I don't know, 8 or 9 sessions. I can talk for twice as long about just this part by itself. That's why we want to separate it so that we give it its full due respect, so to speak. So we'll only cover some of it here, very high level. So now, how do we bridge towards actually experiencing all of this? And this is the bridge. The bridge to God's presence is going to be your own being, your own awareness. As I just said, if we start with what we said earlier, God is infinite, self-aware being. And we said that the being of all beings, including our being, is God's being. There is only God's being, infinite being, and manifestations of that, right? We talked about that. I was very careful about how I defined it. It doesn't mean we are God. It doesn't mean God is in us or enters in us or merges with us. None of that. Remember? None of that. The screen does not become the images. The images don't become the screen. Okay? But what exists is the screen and only the screen. Everything else is an appearance. So the being of all beings is God's being. Only his being is real. Okay, so that's the second point. Therefore, we follow on and say, human beings have the ability to reflect all of God's attributes, including self-awareness. In modern language, in psychology, in neuroscience, this is referred to as meta-consciousness. Okay, it's not just being conscious of something, not just being aware, it's being aware of being aware. Okay, it's a being aware that I am having an experience. I am aware of something. That's what is called meta-consciousness. It's a higher level of consciousness. Okay, actually, only human beings have that. Other creatures like animals or insects have awareness. They have a level of consciousness, right? All living things have a level of consciousness. Okay, so they have consciousness, but they don't have meta-consciousness. Okay, this has been established scientifically that that's what differentiates us. We are aware of what we are experiencing. We are aware of what we are conscious of. That's called meta-consciousness. Okay, so that's another point. Now, with this meta-consciousness, what can we do as human beings? Well, we can know the things in the world, we can experience them, right? External objects, right? Anything that I can point to, like this pen or this ball that I've used in many videos that you've seen so far. These are external objects, right? And I have the ability to experience this object from the outside, right? Through my sense perception. I can see this ball, I can touch it, I could taste it if I want to, I can smell it, I can experience it from the outside, externally, right? I cannot be the ball. Right? I cannot enter the ball and experience being the ball. I can only know it from the outside, right? So for external objects, we can experience them from the outside through our sense perception. But for our own selves, we have the ability to also experience it from the external, right? We can experience our own bodies, right? We can touch the body, can see the body, we can taste the body if we want to, we can smell the body, especially on a hot day. Okay, so we can know the body externally. Okay, but what's different about ourselves is that we can also know ourselves internally, right? Through inner experience, by introspecting our own minds, we can know our inner dimension. We can know our thoughts, our feelings, emotions, and we can know sensations. When you feel heat or cold or pain, you don't know it as an external object like this. You know it internally. You experience it from the inside. So we are able to know ourselves in a much deeper way than we can know anything external. Okay? So that's why by introspecting and directly knowing our own being, we can know God's being. Because as I said at the beginning, the being of all beings, including our being, is God's being. So if we see that, if we can actually experience and introspect, look within, and really know our being from the inside, we can directly experience being. And thereby, this will be the closest that we can possibly come to knowing God. And that's why on this right-hand side here, I have this beautiful, very well-known hadith, which says, "Man arifa nafsa, faqad arifa rabbah." Whoever knows himself knows his God. Okay? God is known through ourselves. So hopefully this framework now helps to understand the depth of what is being said here. That the deepest level of knowing God is by knowing ourselves. Knowing ourselves, why is it so special? Why is it that I would know God by knowing myself rather than knowing the universe? You know, I could study the whole universe. Human beings are a very tiny part of the universe. Why would the human beings be the best way to know God? Well, it's because of this reason. Because of, first of all, what we represent, the ability to reflect all of God's attributes is in us, in a single being. And because our being, just like every other thing's being, is God's being. But I don't have the ability to experience something external to me, its being, right? I can't experience the being of something external to me. I can experience directly my own being. And so that's why the gateway or the bridge for us to move from self-awareness to an understanding of God and an experience of God's presence is actually through ourselves. Okay. Now, the next slide, some of you who have been with us in previous discussions will be familiar with. I will cover it again, but again, very high level at this point. And it's important because when I say knowing our being, your own being, right, ourselves, I have to be very, very precise about what we mean by that, okay? When we say knowing my own being, this means something very specific. You have to know exactly where the being lies, because as a human being, we have a complex structure. So if we don't, if we don't understand it in careful detail, we can get lost in what exactly is being meant by knowing our own being. Okay, so the way that I explain it is that there are three dimensions to the human structure. Okay, there is the ruh, which is the spirit. Okay, there is what in the Quran is called al-qalb, which is the heart, or you can think of it as the mind. Okay, and then there's the body, al-jasad. Okay, so human beings have these three kind of dimensions. Now, I've drawn these as like three circles, but to be very careful about this, again, the ruh, and these are the kind of things we would go into in much more detail. The ruh permeates the whole thing. It's not that there is an inner core and then there's outer layers. The ruh is dimensionless. Okay, the ruh has no size. Okay, the mind and the body, they are physical entities. They have a certain dimension to them. Your mind exists here, your body is here. So they are finite, defined bodies, objects. The ruh is not like that. The ruh is dimensionless. It doesn't have a size. Okay, so that's why it's always difficult to draw a diagram to make this clear, but hopefully you get the idea. I drew a dotted line just to give you an idea that the ruh actually permeates the whole thing. Okay, it's the inner core, but it also permeates everything. And the key thing that we will discuss is that you are the ruh. You are not the body or the mind. You are neither of those things. You have a body. You have a mind. Or you could even say you are wearing a body. You are wearing a mind. But they are not you. You are the ruh. And that ruh is pure being, consciousness. That self-aware being is the ruh. The body is not self-aware being. The mind, the heart, the qalb is not self-aware being. Not in that sense. It is not the essence. It is the ruh that is pure being, consciousness. Okay, and that ruh is always directly connected to Allah. It's a beautiful hadith I always love, which says, إن روح المؤمن لأشد اتصالا بروح الله من اتصال الشعاع الشمس بها. So our ruh is more intensely connected to God than the rays of the sun are connected to the sun. That's how intensely close and connected the ruh is to God. Okay, it is divine. It is connected directly to the divine. And what we'll see from the spiritual practices that reveal this to us is that ruh is unchanging and it is boundaryless. There's no sense of limit. As I said, there's no size to it. Right? It's not like you have a small ruh or a big ruh. Right? It doesn't have a size to it. It's boundaryless. And it's ever unchanging. All of the change that you feel is happening in the body, is happening in the mind, but the ruh is never changing, totally unchanging and boundaryless. It is also, most importantly, in a state of permanent peace and joy, because it is needless. It has no wants. It has no needs. it doesn't change. It's just there witnessing everything else. In that sense, it's like God. It has those type of attributes because it's a reflection of God. God doesn't change. God doesn't need. God doesn't want. God's essence is ever unchanging, needless, total peace. That ruh is a reflection of that. It's a perfect reflection of that. That's why we are the reflection of the name Allah. And so the last thing I'll leave you with is just a bit of a taste of the kind of things that we work on to experience this and bring it alive. And thereby overcome all of the suffering, all of the unhappiness, all of the unsatisfactoriness that we feel in our lives. It's because of the body and the mind. It's actually all the mind, in fact. It's got nothing to do with the ruh. The ruh is never disturbed. It's never feeling unhappy. Okay? And so one of the practices we do is the practice of pure being, this focus on the sense of I am. Okay? It's something that you can learn to do, to see through all of the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that arise every moment. They're coming and going. But deep within that, if you really learn to pay attention, you'll see there is a deep sense, even when there's no thought, no feeling, no sensation, there is a knowing that I am, I exist, I am aware. That sense of I am is the real you. That's you. That's what is the core of what can manifest all of the attributes of God, the real attributes, the beautiful attributes. And we learn to focus on this and to develop it, to allow it to actually become our natural state again by not getting lost in the thoughts and the emotions. That's what's happening to us. We are getting, we are misidentifying ourselves, misunderstanding what's going on. And so we get lost in the body and the mind, not realizing that's not who we are. We are that ruh. And so all of the problems arise from there. And so we learn to observe without reaction. You shift that attention to that unchanging witness of those objects. And just staying there and experience what that witness feels like. What is its nature? Okay, not to do it rationally, intellectually, no, just actually experiencing. Be there, just spend time with that sense of I am and see what its nature is. See for yourself and confirm for yourself. I can personally confirm I've done this, and what you'll find, what I have found, I think you will find, all humans will find, that it is pure peace, natural joy, a kind of spaciousness where you don't feel any boundaries, any limits. And there's no sense of wanting anything or needing anything. It just is, and it's just aware of everything that's happening. And this becomes the gateway for us to experience God's presence, because when you experience that witness, you will automatically feel that He is here too. That's where you meet Him. You won't meet Him in your mind. You won't meet Him in the external world. You'll meet Him there. When you're in that state, you are in the right state of being or state of mind to meet Him. Okay. And so these names that I've put here, these beautiful names, Al-Haq represents being. Al-Shaheed represents that witness, the one that sees everything that's happening. and as-salam, that represents that pure joy and peace because of this unchanging, unwanting, unneeding reality. That is the nature of being. That is the nature of being. Being manifests through this entire process that we talked about. All this manifestation, does it need to do that? Does it want to do that in a way which would disturb it if it didn't do it? No, of course not. It's pure infiniteness. It has no needs to fulfill. And so that is its very nature, that completeness, that fulfillment, that lack of any sense of lack. Nothing's missing. Your essence, your ruh shares those same attributes. And that's why it becomes the best way for you to meet God here and now. That's what we will be going into in more detail, inshallah. So with that, I'll stop here and look forward to any questions or comments or contributions from anyone. Thank you.